They say the deepest wounds don't come from enemies. They come from the people you trust the most. In the heart of Atlanta, a family built on faith and unity was about to shatter, and no one, not the congregation, not the neighbors, not even those closest to them, saw it coming. Pastor Daniel Carter stood in front of his church every Sunday, delivering messages of love, redemption, and integrity. His voice carried authority, his presence commanded respect, and his followers hung on his every word. To them, he wasn't just a preacher. He was a guiding light, a man of God, the kind of leader people turn to in times of trouble. But inside the walls of his own home, a very different story was unfolding. The center of it all, was Olivia Carter, his 17-year-old daughter, a young woman full of life, intelligence, and ambition. Teachers admired her drive. Friends envied her kindness, and the world seemed wide open before her. She had dreams bigger than the city skyline, and the determination to make them happen. And by her side, through it all, was Maya Thompson, her best friend, her confidant, the person she trusted most. But trust can be deceiving. What started as a picture-perfect family would soon turn into a nightmare. Secrets hidden beneath the surface were beginning to crack through, revealing something far darker than anyone could have imagined. And when the truth finally came to light, it left behind a trail of heartbreak, betrayal, and one question no one could ever have prepared for. How could a man so revered destroy the very thing he was meant to protect? Stick around, because this is a story you won't forget. And before we go any further, make sure to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell. You won't want to miss what happens next. The Carter family was admired by nearly everyone who knew them. They were the kind of family people looked up to, the kind that seemed to have it all: love, faith, and success. Their home, a well-kept house just a few blocks from the church, always felt warm and inviting. Sunday mornings were spent in worship, with Pastor Daniel standing at the pulpit, his deep voice filling the room with sermons about righteousness, forgiveness, and the power of faith. To his congregation, he was more than a preacher. He was a guide, a mentor, a man whose words could lift spirits and change lives. His wife, Grace, stood beside him in every way. She was known for her quiet strength, always poised, always supportive. The kind of woman who made every guest feel welcome and every church member feel seen. Their marriage was viewed as solid, an example of partnership built on faith and mutual respect. Together, they painted the picture of a home filled with stability, where love was the foundation of everything. The heart of this family was Olivia, their only daughter. At 17, she carried the kind of energy that made people believe in the future. She was smart, determined, and full of life. Teachers spoke highly of her, praising her discipline and intelligence. She excelled in school, dreamed of a future beyond Atlanta, and had a natural ability to bring people together. Her laughter was contagious, her presence impossible to ignore. She was the kind of girl who made friends easily, but one person stood above the rest: Maya Thompson. Maya had been by Olivia's side since childhood. From elementary school playgrounds to high school hallways, they had been inseparable. They knew each other's dreams, fears, and secrets. If Olivia needed advice, she turned to Maya. If Maya needed support, she knew Olivia would be there. Their friendship wasn't just strong, it was family. But something had changed. First, Olivia couldn't put her finger on it. Her father, the man she had always looked up to, started acting differently. It wasn't sudden. It was quiet, creeping into the everyday moments in ways that made her feel uneasy. His tone would shift when he thought no one else was listening. His presence, once steady and reassuring, felt different in ways she couldn't explain. He seemed distracted, distant in moments when he should have been engaged. And then there were the times when she caught him looking at Maya, not in the way a father looks at his daughter's best friend, but in a way that made Olivia's stomach tighten. She wanted to ignore it, to believe she was imagining things. But the more she paid attention, the more it became impossible to dismiss. Maya, on the other hand, didn't seem to notice. She still laughed at Pastor Daniel's jokes, still accepted his compliments, still treated him with the same trust she always had. Olivia tried to tell herself it was nothing, that she was reading too much into small moments. But something in her gut told her otherwise. And when the truth finally surfaced, it would shake everything she thought she knew about her family, her best friend, and the man she had trusted all her life. Pastor Daniel Carter had spent years earning the trust of his congregation, his family, and his community. His words carried weight. His presence commanded respect, and his guidance was sought by many. To outsiders, he was the perfect husband, a devoted father, and a man who lived by the principles he preached. But behind closed doors, his actions began to tell a different story. Maya had always seen him as a second father. She spent so much time at the Carter household that it felt like a second home. He had been there for her during difficult times, offering wisdom and encouragement when she needed it most. At first, his kindness felt like the support of a trusted mentor, someone who genuinely cared about her future. But slowly, the dynamic between them began to shift. It started with compliments. He would praise her intelligence, tell her how mature she was for her age, how lucky Olivia was to have a friend like her. She dismissed them at first, thinking they were nothing more than friendly encouragement. But over time, the compliments became more personal. He would comment on how beautiful she was growing up to be, how she carried herself with grace beyond her years. It was always said with a smile, always laced with just enough ambiguity to make her second-guess whether she was reading too much into it. Then came the late-night messages. At first, they were innocent words of encouragement, reminders to stay focused on her studies, check-ins about how she was doing. But as the months went on, they became more frequent, more intimate. He would ask about her feelings, her insecurities, the things she didn't share with most people. He spoke to her in ways that made her feel special, understood, seen in a way she hadn't before. Maya, still young and figuring out the world, didn't recognize it for what it was. She thought it was care, concern, maybe even a special kind of friendship. She had always admired him, trusted him, looked up to him. So when he told her she was different, that she had potential beyond what others saw, that he believed in her in a way no one else did, she believed it. And when he suggested they talk privately, away from distractions, she saw no harm in it. Olivia, however, noticed the changes. She noticed how her father's attention seemed more focused on Maya than it should be, how his phone was always turned face down when she walked into the room, how he would lower his voice whenever Maya's name came up, the way Maya would glance away whenever Olivia brought up her father in conversation. At first, she brushed it off. Maybe she was being paranoid. Maybe she was overthinking things. But the feeling wouldn't go away. It clung to her, gnawed at her, whispered that something was wrong. And then one evening, she found the proof. She hadn't meant to go through her father's phone. She wasn't the type to invade privacy, to dig for things that weren't meant for her eyes. But when he left it unattended on the kitchen counter, a message flashed across the screen, Maya's name, followed by words that made Olivia's stomach drop. She hesitated for only a second before picking up the phone, her hands trembling as she unlocked it. What she found shattered any doubt she had left. The messages between her father and her best friend were not those of a mentor and a student, not of a pastor and a member of his congregation. They were filled with words she never imagined her father would write, filled with familiarity and intimacy that had no place between them. Late-night conversations, reassurances, expressions of care that crossed boundaries she couldn't ignore. Her heart pounded in her chest as she scrolled through them, each message cutting deeper than the last. Every line confirmed what she had feared, what she had tried to convince herself wasn't real. Her father, the man who stood before a congregation, preaching honesty and faithfulness, was not the man she thought he was. And Maya, the girl she had trusted with her secrets, had been keeping the biggest one of all. Everything Olivia had known, everything she had believed about her family, was falling apart right in front of her, and there was no turning back now. Olivia sat in silence for a long time, staring at the messages that had rewritten everything she thought she knew. Her fingers tightened around the phone, her pulse loud in her ears. The room around her felt smaller. like the walls were pressing in, suffocating her with the weight of what she had just uncovered. Maya, her best friend, the girl she had trusted more than anyone, the person she had shared her secrets with, laughed with, cried with, the same girl who had stood beside her through every phase of life, through every heartbreak, through every struggle. And now she was the one holding a knife to their friendship, carving a divide so deep Olivia wasn't sure it could ever be repaired. She couldn't sit with this. She couldn't pretend like she didn't know. Without a second thought, Olivia grabbed her phone and sent a message that we need to talk. Now! Minutes later, they met at the park where they had spent countless afternoons as kids, sharing dreams about their futures. But this wasn't like before. Olivia stood stiff, arms crossed, jaw clenched so tightly it ached. Maya hesitated as she approached, her hands fidgeting, eyes darting everywhere but at Olivia. "What's going on?" Maya asked, trying to keep her voice steady. Olivia pulled out her phone and held the screen up for her to see. The color drained from Maya's face instantly. She didn't even ask what Olivia was talking about. She knew. "Tell me the truth," Olivia demanded, her voice low, sharp, controlled. Maya opened her mouth, but no words came out. 1,000 excuses seemed to flicker across her face, denial, explanations, justifications, but she said nothing. Her silence was the loudest confirmation Olivia could have gotten. "How long?" Olivia's voice cracked. "How long has this been happening?" Maya shook her head. "It's not what you think. Don't stand here and lie to me." I saw everything. Olivia's hands trembled, but her voice didn't waver. "You were supposed to be my best friend." Maya's lips parted, as if she wanted to say something, to apologize, to make it make sense. But nothing she could say would undo what had been done. For the first time in their friendship, Maya had nothing to say. And Olivia? She had nothing left to give. She turned on her heel and walked away, leaving Maya standing there, shoulders hunched, looking like she had lost something she would never get back. But Olivia wasn't finished. Her father had answers to give, too. She didn't wait for the perfect moment, didn't plan out her words. She stormed into the house, her heart pounding so hard she thought it might crack her ribs. Daniel Carter was sitting in his study, calm, reading over his sermon notes like nothing had changed, like his entire world wasn't about to come crashing down to "We need to talk." Olivia's voice was sharp, slicing through the quiet. Daniel glanced up, surprised at her tone. He set his papers aside and folded his hands in his lap. "What's wrong?" Olivia stepped forward and placed his phone on the desk in front of him. "I know." For the first time, she saw something flicker in his expression, something fast, something calculating. He reached for the phone, flipping it over, scrolling for what she had seen. When he looked back at her, his jaw tightened. "Olivia, you don't understand. I understand perfectly." She crossed her arms. "You've been lying. You've been lying to Mom, to the church, to me." He let out a slow breath and leaned forward. "You need to listen to me, okay? This isn't what you think." Maya, she was confused. She misinterpreted things. Olivia let out a bitter laugh. "Misinterpreted? Are you serious?" "I read everything, Dad." "You can't talk your way out of this." Daniel's calm exterior cracked. He pushed back from his chair, standing. "Olivia, lower your voice or what?" Her fists clenched at her sides. "You don't get to tell me what to do. Not after this." His expression darkened. "Do you have any idea what will happen if you go around saying these things? Do you have any idea what this could do to this family? To me, to you?" Olivia's voice was sharp with disbelief. "That's all you care about." Daniel took a step closer. His voice dropped lower, but there was no warmth left in it. "Think before you say something you can't take back to—" "Oh, I'm not taking anything back." To Olivia's heart raced, but she refused to back down. "That I should tell Mom. I should tell the church. I should tell everyone who thinks you're this perfect, righteous man." That Daniel's breathing grew heavier, his hands curling into fists. He looked at her, really looked at her, and Olivia saw something she had never seen in him before: fear. Because for the first time he wasn't in control. For the first time, someone had the power to ruin him. "You don't want to do that," he said, his voice lower now, edged with something that almost sounded like a threat. Olivia held her ground. "Watch me." The house was quiet, too quiet. Olivia sat on her bed, staring at the door, her mind racing. She had told herself she needed to wait until morning to act, to think through her next steps. But every second that passed felt unbearable. She couldn't pretend this hadn't happened. She couldn't let it sit. Down the hall, she could hear the faint creak of the floorboards, slow, deliberate footsteps moving toward her room. The doorknob twisted, and before she could react, the door opened. Daniel Carter stepped inside. His face was calm, but there was something different in his eyes. Something controlled. Something dangerous. He closed the door behind him, the latch clicking into place. "We need to talk." His voice was steady, almost too even. Olivia straightened her back, refusing to let him see her fear. "There's nothing left to say." Daniel took a step closer, hands in his pockets. "You're upset. I get that. But we can fix this. We can make it go away." Olivia shook her head. "I'm done listening to you. You don't get to lie your way out of this." Not a flicker of frustration crossed his face. He let out a slow breath. "I don't think you understand what's at stake here. If you go through with this, if you open your mouth, you will destroy this family. Do you really want that?" Olivia didn't flinch. "You already destroyed it." His jaw tightened. His fingers twitched at his sides. "You're making a mistake," he warned. "No, you did." She reached for her phone, ready to send the message she had typed out hours ago. It was time. The truth had to come out. That was the moment something inside Daniel snapped. Before she could react, before she could even process what was happening, he lunged forward. The impact sent the phone tumbling from her hand. It hit the floor with a dull thud, skidding out of reach. Olivia struggled, shoving against him, but his grip was ironclad. His breathing was ragged, his movements frantic. "I didn't want this," he muttered, voice shaking. "I didn't want it to come to this." She kicked, she fought, but he was stronger and desperate. The room was filled with the sound of struggle, the rustling of sheets, the crash of a lamp knocked over in the chaos. Then silence. The weight lifted. The fight was over. Daniel stumbled back, his chest rising and falling in uneven breaths. His hands were trembling as he looked down at what he had done. Olivia lay motionless. His own daughter. His hands. The same hands that had baptized church members. The same hands that had written sermons about righteousness and redemption, had taken the life of the one person who had dared to challenge him. He staggered back, gripping the edge of the desk, his vision blurring. This wasn't supposed to happen. But now there was no going back. His pulse pounded in his ears as his mind raced. He needed to think. He needed to act. He turned sharply, wiping his hands on his pants, his breath shallow. His gaze darted around the room, scanning for anything that could explain this. A break-in? Yes, that was the only way. He moved quickly, methodically. He knocked over more furniture, pulled out drawers, shattered the lamp completely. Then, with shaking hands, he grabbed a chair and smashed the bedroom window, letting shards of glass scatter across the floor. It had to look real. It had to look believable. Daniel stepped back, taking in the chaos he had created. To the untrained eye, it would seem obvious. A struggle, a forced entry, a tragedy. But he knew better. He knew that no matter how well he arranged the scene, no matter how convincing the lie, the truth had already been written in blood. The flashing red and blue lights painted the Carter home in harsh streaks of color as officers moved through the house, marking evidence, snapping photos, and murmuring among themselves. The crime scene was chaotic. Overturned furniture, shattered glass, a broken lamp. At first glance, it seemed like the tragic aftermath of a violent break-in. But seasoned detectives had seen enough to know when something didn't add up. Detective Marcus Holloway, a veteran investigator with a sharp eye for details, surveyed the room. He knelt near the broken window, running a gloved hand over the scattered glass. Something was off. If the window had been broken from the outside, most of the glass should have landed inside the room. Instead, the majority of it was outside on the grass, as if someone had smashed it from within. He turned to his partner, Detective Lisa Grayson. Whoever did this wanted us to think they forced their way in. Lisa nodded, jotting down notes. So, why go through all this trouble to stage it? That was the question that set the investigation in motion. Meanwhile, in a cramped interrogation room at the precinct, Maya Thompson sat across from two detectives, her hands gripping the edges of her chair. Her eyes were red-rimmed, her breath unsteady. Hours had passed since she'd been brought in for questioning, but she had barely said a word beyond the basics. But now, as they pressed her, something in her cracked. "He wouldn't stop texting me," she whispered, her voice barely audible. At first, it was about school, about life, just little things. Then it changed. He started talking about how I was special, how he understood me better than anyone. The detectives exchanged a glance. "Maya, we need you to tell us everything," one of them urged. "Every message, every conversation. If you know something about what happened to Olivia, now is the time to say it." Tears welled in her eyes. She knew. Olivia knew something wasn't right. She asked me about it, and I lied to her. I didn't want to see it either. But then she confronted him. Maya's voice broke. She told him she was going to expose him. The room was silent. The weight of her words hung between them. Back at the Carter home, forensic specialists were combing through evidence when they found something that shattered Daniel Carter's alibi completely. A small trace of blood, barely noticeable to the naked eye, on the cuff of his dress shirt. Lab analysis confirmed it was Olivia's. Daniel had told investigators he wasn't near her when it happened, that he had found her like that, but the blood said otherwise. Then came the final nail in the coffin. The security cameras from a neighbor's house, just across the street, had captured movement from the Carter residence on the night of the incident. The footage showed Daniel leaving through the back door at the exact time he had claimed to be elsewhere. When the detectives confronted him with the evidence, his mask of composure began to crack. His carefully constructed version of events was falling apart piece by piece. And with each revelation, one thing became clearer. This wasn't a random tragedy. It was something far worse. The courtroom was packed. Rows of wooden benches were filled with church members, neighbors, and reporters, all waiting to see justice unfold. The once respected Pastor Daniel Carter sat at the defendant's table, his posture rigid, his face unreadable. The man who once preached about faith and morality was now a prisoner of his own lies. Gasps rippled through the room as Maya Thompson took the stand. She gripped the edge of the witness box, her voice shaking as she recounted the messages, the manipulation, the trust that had been twisted into something ugly. She admitted to being blind to the warning signs, to dismissing Olivia's fears. And when she spoke of the night Olivia confronted Daniel, how her best friend had been determined to expose the truth, the weight of her guilt was clear. Then came Grace Carter, the woman who had stood by her husband for years. But today, she stood against him. She described the shift in his behavior, the late nights, the moments of cold detachment that she had brushed aside. She had believed in him, defended him. But now, she saw him for what he truly was. Forensic experts followed, dismantling every lie Daniel had told. The blood evidence, the staged crime scene, the security footage that contradicted his alibi. There was no escaping the truth. When the jury returned, the air was thick with anticipation. We, the jury, find the defendant guilty of murder in the first degree. A collective exhale spread through the room. Some wept, some nodded in silent relief. Daniel Carter, the man who had commanded a congregation, was sentenced to life in prison with no possibility of parole. As he was led away, he didn't speak. He didn't look at his wife. He didn't acknowledge the people who once trusted him. He had spent years controlling the narrative, but now the truth controlled him. The Carter family's fall from grace became more than a headline. It was a lesson, a reminder that trust should never be blind, that power without accountability can destroy even those closest to it. Olivia Carter deserved more than justice. She deserved to be remembered, and her story, though marked by tragedy, ensured that no one would forget. Olivia Carter's story is more than just a tragedy. It's a lesson, a reminder that silence can be dangerous, that intuition should never be ignored, and that those in power must always be held accountable. She saw the truth. She stood her ground, and though her life was stolen, her voice still echoes. Too often, the people we trust the most are the ones who betray us. But Olivia's story proves that no one is above justice, no matter how respected, no matter how untouchable they seem. If this story resonated with you, take a moment to like this video and subscribe for more deep dives into the stories that need to be told. And we want to hear from you. What story should we cover next? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. Thank you for watching. Stay aware, stay informed, and never be afraid to question the truth.